We all know what Call of Duty is today. A game with a lazy and really short single player campaign, a multiplayer mode full of super sprint, slide cancel, nightmare children, and a free to play battle royale mode full of the same children, terrible microtransactions, and cheating streamers. But there was a time when Call of Duty was a good series, where the developers and publishers seemingly cared about what product they made because they weren't the top dog of the FPS market. They were fighting to become the biggest, so actual effort was required. Now, I've covered the first game and you can check it out with a link in the top right corner of your screen right now. And I think, though, for many people, COD 2 is probably where they started, and that's simply because it was a launch title for the Xbox 360. Although it did launch on PC a month earlier. So, let's take a trip back to see how good Call of Duty 2 plays today. Can it stand the test of time, and can it still be considered one of the best World War II shooters of all time? But just like Call of Duty 1, the campaign is split into three. One for the Soviets, one for the British, and one for the Americans. And we start with the Soviets. So our journey starts in Moscow as a fresh recruit, and after we get to grips with our potatoes, the Germans attack. Now, considering this game is nearly 20 years old, it still looks pretty good. Yeah, the textures up close are a bit low in resolution and it doesn't have all the flashy modern effects, but it still looks really nice. I also recognise some of the Soviet voice actors from Metro. I swear they're the same, or, just all Russians sound alike. It's a decent enough intro to the game. You get some close quarters action, you get to see a whole bunch of AI engaging the enemy, the usefulness of smoke. It's all pretty cool, and the moment to moment gameplay still holds up today in an extremely good way. Call of Duty has been so successful for a reason, right? After this short mission, we get taken to Stalingrad, the same setting as Call of Duty 1. One thing that really stands out is just how many AIs are battling with you at once. You see, what the developers want to get across is the feeling of fighting with a unit or an army, unlike Medal of Honor where you are generally by yourself or just with a handful of guys. This does bring out potential issues with the game that needs balancing. See, if you have a whole bunch of AI fighting with you, can you just sit to one side and let them do everything? Well, no, because your AI are generally useless bullet sponges. It's down to you, the one-man army. But another thing the developers did to get across the feeling of fighting a large unit is infinite spawning enemies, which, in my opinion, is one of the worst things about Call of Duty 2. Now, if you played the first Call of Duty, the Soviet campaign has a few standout moments that you'll probably still remember today. The crossing of the Volga River and the charge of the Red Square, but in Call of Duty 2, the Soviet campaign is definitely the weakest. It doesn't have any real standout moments. You just fight through some buildings, and since it's all in Stalingrad, it all just looks the same. You take out some tanks by sticking explosives on them. Just nothing big, really. Like the final mission of the Soviet campaign is you holding out against waves of Germans, and you know what? It's a total slog, and it goes on for far too long. It doesn't help that your AI teammates are, as usual, useless. So if you don't take out any waves quickly enough, they get into your building and your AI just cannot deal with them. So this level just feels like a bit of a mess, really. It is the last mission in the Soviet campaign, and final missions for me should be big standout moments with a decent degree of challenge. Yes, it has some challenging parts to it, but I'd say that's more down to how inept your AI are. And this mission, it isn't a standout moment. It's a boring version of a horde mode level. Very disappointing. Luckily though, the British campaign fares a lot better and there's a lot more to say about it. So we are off to North Africa, straight into the action with a surprise attack on a German position, and we are being led by the legend himself, Captain Price. Ultimately, it's a short introduction to the British. We need to push down these trenches, secure a bunch of bunkers, and clear out the machine gunners. I think it's missions like these where Call of Duty is at its strongest. While there's some great missions like All Gillied Up, I think the COD gameplay just suits close quarters environments a lot more. It just feels a lot more intense compared to when COD goes mid to long range. Now I want to compare the next mission with the last Soviet mission because they're quite similar. You are set up in a position and need to defend against a German attack, and the attacks come in waves. In the Soviet one, it's kind of boring. They come at you from the same large building in front of you, and you are backed up by your AI who you just cannot rely on at all. In the British mission, you start in a Bren carrier to reinforce a British position under attack. That's already raising the intensity of the mission. You break through the German attack to your front line, and before you know it, the Germans are sending another wave at you with half-tracks, and in the distance, we see a swarm on the horizon. Now I think instantly just this small bit is much better than the Soviets' last mission in its entirety. To keep you on your toes, the Germans start attacking you from another direction. Again, you see swarms of them pushing towards you. It feels pretty epic, to be honest. The Germans then send in tanks, and instead of just getting you on a big turret, you get a unique mechanic to use in this mission. You get control of artillery to use on the tanks and more swarms of infantry. It's a simple mechanic. You just look in a direction through your binoculars, press your button, and then artillery will smash it. The tanks keep rolling in, and so do the infantry. So the action doesn't let up. It's just a much better mission than the Soviet one. The next mission for the British is also pretty cool. You follow your tanks as they soak up enemy fire so you can get in close to the trenches and bunkers. It's a pretty dramatic push, and it's got a great mix of close quarters combat, going through the bunkers, trenches and tunnels, and mid-range across the desert. So once you take out the flat guns, we have a brief romp around this town and then onto another standout mission. So yeah, we find ourselves in a Crusader tank. Now, tank missions are quite common in the early days of Call of Duty. You gotta have these different missions just to spice things up a bit. You control the movement of the tank and the main gun. The machine gun is controlled by the game. Ultimately, it's a simple mission. Charge forward in your armoured column, take out loads of enemy tanks, then the flat guns. To make the mission not just a simple point and click one, you need to hit the enemy tanks in the side or the rear. The main gun of your tank just isn't powerful enough to get through the armour, so you gotta be a bit clever with your movement. The British campaign has a good mix of missions. Most of the infantry ones are in urban environments, which is where I think Call of Duty excels. You get unique mechanics not used in any other missions, a good tank mission, and Captain Price. Let's get onto the American campaign. Many World War II games have had D-Day landings in them, and Call of Duty 2 was the first Call of Duty to feature one. I think it's technically Omaha Beach, but it's not what you expect. We are climbing Point du Hoc, and it does everything it can to remind you of Saving Private Ryan. It's a cool sequence, but the landing itself is really short, so it doesn't have time to make that much of an impact. One thing that is cool about the American campaign is the voice actors. You see, we have a number of people who starred in Band of Brothers. We have Michael Kudlitz, who was Bull Randerman, Rick Gomez, George Luz, Frank John Hughes, Bill Garnier, James Madio as Picani, Ross McCall, Liebgott, and Richard Spite Jr., who was Muck. It's just cool when you notice these voices speaking. The first mission has some good progression. You push inland to this small urban area while hunting for some artillery guns. You find them, blow them up, then face off against a German counterattack. The game handles this counterattack a bit differently. Usually you hold your ground while manning a turret and gunning down waves upon waves of enemy soldiers. It's obviously the big heroic thing, right? But in this mission, you can't hold off the German attack. They push you all the way back to the edge of the cliff. It ends up being a desperate attempt at holding off the enemy. You just gotta keep fighting until you do get reinforcements that come in to save the day. The next mission deserves a special mention. Now, there aren't any standout moments or unique mechanics or anything, but it's a more open mission. You attack a German position in this small village and you need to clear out a number of buildings. You can hit these buildings in any order. It's a small thing, but it just gives you this extra freedom of how you want to finish the mission, and partly because of this, it's a strong mission. You get this bit of freedom mixed with street-to-street fighting, and Americans love freedom, right? And building clearing, paired up with a German counterattack, and you get on top of the tower, grab a sniper rifle and hold out. You primarily need to worry about mortar teams that come in to shell your position. As now, unlike any other mission, your AI can handle themselves, but it does mean that the enemy AI are pretty much no threat to you. And with the mortar teams killed, you get reinforcements to end the German advance. For surprise, we are back with the British, but this time we are not in North Africa. We are now in France, heading towards Caen. Cayenne? I'm not quite sure on the pronunciation. We've circled around to the western side of the city to secure a village. We push in, deal with the Germans and find some American POWs in a garden. Now, a couple of these guys share the same name with the other Americans that I've seen in the American campaign. I don't think they are the same people though. It's more likely that the names are just pulled from like the list of American names. We gotta grab a truck to get the POWs out of there. We get ambushed by a German counterattack and a Tiger tank. Luckily though, we have a Panzerschreck in the truck, so we can just quickly deal with it and get the POWs out of there. You then push forward to secure more villages until we have to hold out in this farmhouse against a counterattack. I think these missions where you have to hold out really does start to show just really how bad the AI is and just how they cannot take care of themselves. Tiger tank pushes up just as our reinforcements get here, but it's down to us to take out the tank. So after flanking round it, smoking it up, explosives are planted and the tank goes boom. And Captain Price tells us that our job is done and the British campaign is actually completed now. The next American mission focuses on Hill 400 and pushing up the hill. There are a number of bunkers along the way that need to be cleared out, so we fight with our men, get to the bunkers, blow our way in and clear them out as we need to secure the main bunker on the hill. What this ends up though is another mission where we have to hold out and wait for reinforcements. And again, it highlights how incompetent your own AI are, as again, they cannot hold their own. Especially in this mission as the Germans attack from nearly every direction. Lots of infantry, some half-tracks and some tanks push up. First we have to take out the mortar teams. You locate them by following the smoke trails on the mortar shells, but then the mess begins. The infantry start pushing in. Luckily, there is all sorts of weapons lying around, so you can keep switching between them, get more ammo, get a Panzerschreck for the half-tracks and the tanks. Even though you only need to hold out for 5 minutes, it just feels like it's so much longer than that. In Call of Duty 2, there are just too many instances of these missions where you need to hold out for reinforcements. It just feels lazy. This mission also, it kind of just feels like the final mission for the American campaign. It's a desperate holdout that's quite challenging, and it feels like a fitting end. But it isn't. There's one more mission. This time we are in Germany. It's kind of a cool opening. It's like a mini D-Day. What's odd is that while there are 3 campaigns, one for Soviets, one for British and one for the Americans, they are actually divided into sub-campaigns set around a certain location or battle. For example, the opening British missions around El Alamein is one campaign. Caen has a few levels and is another campaign. This final mission is also the final campaign called Crossing the Rhine, and it's just this one mission. To me, it feels like that there was a budget or a time issue here, because this mission is really short. I think I finished it in about 10 minutes. You just push in, take out 4 artillery guns. Once that's done, you take out 2 tanks. Job done, game over, a disappointing end. Now when looking back at older games, I do like to talk about the story and how the story progresses. But like with Call of Duty 1, which I made a video about, there really is no story. It's just go take out the Germans or defend against the Germans. Now World War II games can have stories attached to them. I'll always point to Brothers in Arms when talking about this. Yes, in that game you need to take out the Germans, but the story is mainly focused around the main character and the characters within the squad that he commands. It really delves into what happens to them during the war and how it affects them. In Call of Duty 2, since 99% of the AI you're with are just random people that die all the time, there is no connection. Thankfully though, Call of Duty, they didn't stick to this formula, as with Call of Duty 4 and onwards, they had actual stories with characters that people still love to this day. But Call of Duty 2, yeah, it doesn't have one at all. But it is a refinement of the formula that started with Call of Duty 1, and its moment-to-moment gameplay is still really good today. While I think the campaign has its problems, such as infinite spawn AI, a poor Soviet campaign, too many hold for reinforcement missions, it's still an enjoyable experience. Now the multiplayer on PC, it's still active and I did want to play it, but I couldn't really, as the only servers that were active are these weird bot servers that required mods to be downloaded and accounts to be created on their website, so I just didn't bother with them really. But Call of Duty 2, looking back at it and playing all through it, it is still a top quality game. I think it is a shame of just how Call of Duty has been treated over the years and what it is now with it's, you know, it's meant to be this military shooter, but then you can download a skin of Nicki Minaj and Spawn and characters from The Boys and Warhammer 40k things going into it. It's just, yeah, it's just now a money-making microtransaction filled machine. But back in its original days, it was something new and special. And yeah, I can't remember the last time I really enjoyed a Call of Duty. But if you like the video, give the video a like. Let me know what you think of Call of Duty 2 down in the comments below, any memories you've got while playing it. Thank you for watching, and subscribe for more.